Whenever we talk about the climate crisis, our heads are almost always looking up, right? We're focused on the carbon that's already out there. But what if the biggest lever we can pull is actually focused on the carbon that never even makes it into the atmosphere? Today, we're diving into this incredible invisible world of prevented emissions.
So get this. Every single second, humanity adds about 1,200 tons of CO2 to the atmosphere. Let that sink in. By the time I finish just this sentence, yep, there goes another 5,000 or 6,000 tons. It's just a relentless, mind-boggling number.
And that constant, nonstop flood of emissions, that's the heart of the problem. It's a challenge so huge that all of our current solutions, things like carbon capture and offsets, are really struggling to keep up. Honestly, it feels like we're trying to bail out the ocean with a tiny bucket. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? I mean, while we're so busy trying to clean up the mess that's already been made, what if the real game changer is stopping the mess from happening in the first place? Posing that one simple question completely changes the conversation. It flips our focus from reaction to prevention. And this is where we get to reframe something that most companies just see as a headache, a cost of doing business, environmental compliance. We're about to see how enforcing basic rules and regulations isn't just about avoiding a fine. It's actually one of the most direct, most powerful climate tools we have. To actually track this, we need a new way to measure it. It's called ECEP, which stands for Envicomm Carbon Emissions Prevented. Now, let's be super clear about what this isn't. This is not a carbon credit. It's not a carbon offset. Those things deal with emissions after they've already happened. ECEP is totally different. It measures real emissions that were stopped right at the source, all thanks to direct, preventative actions. So here's the official definition. ECEP is the total verified amount of CO2 equivalent that was stopped because of these compliance interventions. Think about it. Pretty much every other climate metric is about emissions that already exist. This is the only one that focuses on the emissions that don't. And that, right there, is the key difference. And prevention isn't some abstract idea. It's super tangible. It's a liter of diesel that wasn't burned because a generator wasn't left idling all night. It's a kilowatt hour of electricity that wasn't wasted. It's a nasty refrigerant leak from an AC unit that got caught and fixed before it could escape. These are real emissions that are stopped dead in their tracks. Okay, so the big question is, how on earth do you count something that didn't happen? I know, it sounds a little tricky, but the process is actually grounded in a super rigorous and auditable method. And listen, this isn't some fluffy marketing term. It's a credible metric built for total transparency. The whole thing is built on these 5 core principles, which is what gives it integrity. Causality basically proves your action is what caused the reduction. Conservatism is huge. It means if you're ever in doubt, you always use the lower, safer number so there's no exaggeration. And the other 3, consistency, transparency, and auditability, they all work together to make sure these numbers are real. They're verifiable, and anyone can trust them. And the actual math? It's surprisingly straightforward. First, you figure out what the emissions would have been if you did nothing. That's your baseline. Then, you measure what the emissions actually were after you stepped in. The difference between those two numbers? Boom! That's your prevented carbon. That's your ECP value. Simple as that. Okay, so that's the theory. It's clear, it makes sense, but let's see what it actually looks like in the real world. We're going to walk through a pretty typical construction project just to see how this all plays out on the ground. So let's zoom in on this, a standard 10-story building going up in the Philippines. We're going to calculate the emissions that were prevented just by making sure the project followed its existing Environmental Compliance Certificate, or ECC. Nothing extra, just enforcing the rules. All right, first up, diesel fuel. Now, on a lot of construction sites, it's super common to see huge, oversized generators running 24/7, or big trucks and excavators just sitting there idling for hours. Simple enforcement, like making sure they use the right size generator and actually turn off their engines, prevents a crazy amount of wasted fuel. And the impact from just that one thing, it's huge. For this single project, just being smarter about diesel use prevented 382 tons of CO2 from ever being created. That is a massive win from just one source. Next, let's look at electricity and material waste. Enforcing pretty basic stuff like setting up an efficient power grid for the site and having a proper waste management plan avoids both wasted energy and the emissions that are baked into materials like concrete and steel that get thrown away. So when you add up the savings from preventing wasted electricity and materials, you get another 255 tons of prevented CO2 emissions,
You can see how this is all starting to stack up.
Now, here's one that often flies under the radar but has an absolutely massive impact: refrigerant leaks. The gases inside air conditioners and refrigerators are incredibly potent greenhouse gases. We're talking sometimes thousands of times more powerful than CO2. So preventing even a tiny leak is a really big deal. And the impact is just staggering. Check this out. Stopping just 50 kilograms of a common refrigerant, that's about the weight of a teenager, from leaking into the atmosphere, prevents the equivalent of 105 tons of CO2. It just goes to show you how a seemingly small act of compliance can have a gigantic climate benefit.
So, let's add it all up for this one building project. By enforcing basic rules for diesel, waste, and refrigerants, we prevented nearly 740 tons of CO2 emissions. That's 740 tons that never got a chance to join that 1,200 ton per second problem we started with. But remember, that was just one building. Now, just imagine scaling this prevention mindset across hundreds, even thousands of projects. The impact starts to multiply really, really fast, and that's where this gets incredibly exciting. Okay, so in 2025, by applying this ECP method across a whole portfolio of projects, that's 137 active ones and 166 new permits, the result was an estimated 101,000 tons of prevented carbon emissions. That is the power of systemic, compliance-driven prevention at scale. But let's be real. 101,000 tons is still just a big abstract number. How do we make that feel, well, real? What does it actually mean in the context of our 1,200 ton per second problem?
And this is where it all clicks. If the world is pumping out 1,200 tons of CO2 every second, then preventing 101,000 tons is like hitting pause on the entire planet's emissions for over 84 seconds. You're not just reducing emissions, you are literally reclaiming global time. You are pushing back against that relentless ticking clock.
And that really brings us to the final powerful idea here. Maybe the most important climate question we can ask isn't just how much carbon did we capture, but this one right here. How much carbon did we stop from ever being emitted in the first place? When we start asking that, we stop seeing compliance as a cost, and we start seeing it for what it truly is: a measurable, powerful, and absolutely essential climate solution.